Gentlelady from Texas.
Ms. Escobar votes yes.
Gentleman from North Dakota.
Mr. Armstrong votes no.
All members voted. Clerk will tally and report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 12 ayes and 15 noes.
The motion to adjourn is not agreed to. Gentleman from California yields back. He yielded back. Oh, I'm sorry. The chair
I yield back.
Chair recognizes himself. I would just say this: why didn't they hold me in contempt?
I move to hold you.
Why didn't the committee hold me in contempt? They certainly could have. It was a completely partisan
moved.
Would the gentleman yield? And I'll explain why.
No. In a second, I want to finish my my time here. It was a completely partisan committee. Why not do it? I mean, the idea that if you could have held the future Speaker of the House, the future Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the Freedom in contempt, why didn't you do it? I think they didn't do it because they knew it was bogus. They knew that the speech or debate clause would not allow them to compel someone member of Congress to come testify. But by the way, I never said I wouldn't testify. I wrote an 11-page letter to Chairman Thompson. I'm still waiting on a response where I spelled out all the concerns we had with this committee, all the things we had caught them saying that were not accurate.
Will the gentleman yield?
No, it's my 5 minutes. I'll yield and we'll have plenty of time. I'm sure there'll be a debate. They never made a record of it. We made a record of Hunter Biden not showing last week. We actually had a court reporter there. We made a record of him not showing up for his deposition when he was over doing a press conference on the Capitol, outside the Capitol. So I think the Democrats know how ridiculous that was. And with that, I would yield to the gentleman from California.
I think the chairman, my colleague, Mr. Swalwell, who participated in that contempt by asking for and holding that press conference for Hunter Biden, knows very well the history.
I'm going to end today, because I think we're probably about done, where we started, which is that I and my colleagues pointed out that the chairman is 600-plus days in defiance of a congressional subpoena. My colleague from North Dakota who just spoke said no one should ever be allowed to set the terms for their own subpoena compliance. And he's never seen somebody defy a congressional subpoena like this. Mr. Van Drew from New Jersey has throughout the day said there's rules for thee, but not for me. That's what Hunter Biden is asking. And then the chairman, in a very defensive response to the point we've made about his own subpoena defiance, said, well, all I wanted to do was I sent an 11-page letter and I was willing to testify, I was willing to negotiate. Well, that sounds a hell of a lot like what Hunter Biden is doing when Chairman Comer says, come in publicly or privately. He says, I'll come in publicly. Then you say, well, it has to be privately. And then he comes in willing publicly twice in the last month. So to use Mr. Van Drew, is it rules for thee, but not for me, Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman yield.
Is it rules for thee and not for me? Because that's what it really feels like is going on here. So again, to end where we started, it is absurd that this committee, where its own chairman is in defiance of a congressional subpoena, is holding a hearing about somebody else who actually wants to show up and testify publicly for their own congressional subpoena.
Gentleman yield. No, he won't.
Chair now recognizes himself. Mr. Fong, what happened in the last decade? I mean, in your testimony, you said you drew our attention to a hearing 12 years ago. The Department of Homeland Security, there was a hearing on the Department of Homeland Security had retained a defense contractor to conduct round-the-clock monitoring of social media. And you said there was bipartisan opposition to that. What's happened in the last decade that we do not? Because here's the difference. Here's the big difference. The same agency, the Department of Homeland Security, last year tried to set up a disinformation governance board. Some committee which is going to tell us what we're allowed to say, what we're not allowed to say, and the only side objecting to that was the Republicans. And so I'm like you, I want to know what's happened in the last 12 years.
I mean, a lot has changed. It wasn't that long ago that the Democratic Party stood up very strongly against the Department of Homeland Security and criticized it as a politicized agency.
By the way, Mr. Funk, you're not a Republican, is that right?
No, I'm an independent.
Okay, keep going.
But not that long ago, Democrats directly and forcefully criticized the Department of Homeland Security as an agency that run amok, that could interfere in our elections to help Republicans. This is an agency that's grown by billions of dollars since 9/11, that was originally set up to fight Islamic radicalization to prevent another terrorist attack, that now polices tweets, that now polices comments on Facebook and Instagram, that now, in a biased way, censors regular American legitimate speech on political issues.
The ranking member said in her opening statement that there's no evidence of censorship. Is that an accurate statement? Is there any evidence? Is there no evidence of censorship, Mr. Fong?
I mean, I just, on my Substack yesterday, showed a New York Times reporter, based on false information, being censored, being shadow banned.
Yeah, but I mean, you covered in the Twitter files. Government pressured Twitter to take down certain tweets by American citizens. Facebook got pressure from the White House to do the same. YouTube got pressure from the White House to do the same. They all work together in this project, this election integrity partnership, to do the same. On and on it goes. But they say, oh, we've had 6 hearings on censorship. I kind of think, Mr. Lukianoff, I kind of think the First Amendment's probably worth doing 6 hearings. I would say 60 hearings maybe better, maybe 600. I mean, we're talking about the First Amendment.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Well, Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz hit the nail on the head that I just kind of wish we could think about this as from a transpartisan point of view. They will immediately get this when it's a Republican administration trying to do the same thing. But we've presented a great deal of evidence that this is actually happening, that it's being encouraged by the government in many cases. The story that came out this morning, the idea of, say, Donald Trump decides to actually try to get a book removed from Amazon. If it was a book that people on my side of the political fence, on the left, liked, we'd freak out, and rightfully so. But at the same time, it seems like there's nothing we can actually do to get our own side of the political fence concerned about the idea of collusion between some of the most powerful people in Silicon Valley and in the country.
The censorship mob will come for them too, right? Right now it's focused on, I mean, the Fifth Circuit said this, the court decision, it's focused primarily on conservatives, primarily on people on the political right. But it will come for the left too.
Oh yeah, it already does.
It already does.
I defend
and it
people on the
already
left on
has.
campus all the time, and it's very strange to try to get people to be concerned when even people they agree with are losing their jobs. My latest book, Counseling of the American Mind, is filled with examples just from the past couple of years of professors on the left losing their job. Oh.
This is the reason I've invited more Democrats in here, Democrats like you guys, or independents like you guys, who actually embrace the First Amendment. This is what we spent the entire, as they rightly point out, we spent the entire first year of this Congress, primarily in this subcommittee, focused on what's happening to the First Amendment. Because I say this all the time. If you can't speak, if you can't talk, you can't practice your faith, you can't share your faith, you can't petition your government, you don't have a free press. I mean, that is the ability to speak is fundamental to how we do things in this great country. And if we lose that, oh my goodness. And you said something earlier that stuck with me. You said, we're losing even the ability to ask questions. Mm-hmm. It's not just statements. You can't even question. You could go back to COVID. You couldn't even say, I wonder if this thing came from a lab. If you just raised the question, you got censored. And down the line it went. We learned just a couple weeks ago, that Dr. Fauci, when he was asked, where did the 6-foot social distancing come from? And you know what he said? We just sort of made it up. I'm not sure where it came from. And think of the impact that had. But if you question that, if you just ask the question, why do we have this? Half the time the stuff they tell us is just false. You can't even question that, for goodness sake. So that's why it's important we have these hearings. And folks like you who aren't on the same side of the political aisle as us are willing to come forward, and we appreciate it. I'll give you a chance to respond in the last 10 seconds.
When I was talking about literally questioning as well. Like, one of the things that we did with ChatGPT was run the questions that we ask students about whether or not someone should be allowed to speak on a particular campus, and we were told one of the questions by ChatGPT was an inappropriate question to ask ChatGPT.
Yeah, and again, highlighting the danger of when this goes to scale and happens in real time with artificial intelligence. That is the frightening part. That's why we got to get this right.
It treats us like children, not citizens.
Well said, well said. I just correct the record. It wasn't 3 days after the election. It was 3 days into the administration. So it was the government in power, the White House saying, take down this tweet ASAP. That to me is significant. Whatever you think. And I would just say this, we are going to keep having hearings on the attack on the First Amendment, because as my colleague from Ohio pointed out just a few minutes ago, it is fundamental. We had a witness in our last hearing from Canada, journalist from Canada, and she talked about the underpinnings of Western civilization rest on the ability to speak, to debate, and not be afraid, not be intimidated by the government. And to the point from the ranking member, so they didn't take it down. Well, we all know there's this thing called the chilling effect when big government, particularly the White House, is saying to big tech, take down this tweet ASAP. I see you're nodding your head, Mr. Lukanoff. Yeah. You know what, I want to do one last thing. I think you wanted to respond to Mr. Goldman a little while ago. We'll give you a chance to do that, and then we'll close the hearing. But I think you had a response to something Mr. Goldman said, Congressman Goldman said earlier. If you don't remember, that's fine, we'll go on. But you put your mic on there if you would.
It was frustrating to hear people like me and Lee, who have done a great job defending people across the political spectrum over our career, be dismissed as people who only care about the free speech rights of one side of the political fence. I mean, fire has been second to no one when it comes to taking people on all across the political spectrum, and I have the hate mail to prove it.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. That's why, as Mr. Bishop pointed out earlier, why, as chair of this committee, I've invited more Democrats than I bet any Republican, maybe, who knows, maybe ever, I don't know. But certainly in this Congress, we've had more people on the left, as you've both described, or in the center, or people who were Democrats who say, I'm now independent because I can't take what they're doing. I just don't stand with them on their efforts to restrict the First Amendment. So again, I want to thank you all for being here, for speaking out.
Agree. Yes, definitely.
Yes.
Gentleman's time has expired. The
Excuse me,
gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I have a point of order. In your last statement, you said that Steve Jensen of the FBI opposed the collection of this information for banks. That's a misrepresentation of his testimony.
Not an appropriate point of
Jensen
order.
said
The
that the
gentlelady from
information was
Florida
not
is
used.
recognized
Would you
for 5
release the
minutes.
transcript so that we can hear
Not an
exactly
appropriate-
what
it's
Mr. Jensen
Not an appropriate
said?
point of order, and the gentlelady knows that, but she continues to try to ask
Same way you
a
do.
question that is
Same
not a
way
point of.
you interject.
I don't think
sir.
I've raised one point of order today.
You interject all the
The
time.
gentlelady from
sir.
Florida is recognized.
All the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'm actually I continue to be stunned by the big government advocates that we come across and the ones that serve in this very chamber. They're not even hiding it anymore. They're saying the quiet part out loud. They want dependency, they want control.
And constitutional. And that's the concern. That's why we're having this hearing. We'll get to our guest here in a second. But with that, I would yield to the ranking member for an opening statement before we get to our witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everyone that's here at this hearing. I'm glad that the chairman opened with who instigated this hearing, which is George Hill, and what the purpose of this hearing is. At the end of the day, the purpose of this hearing is to minimize what happened on January 6th and the lawful prosecution of individuals who were engaged in that practice. The chairman wants us to believe that people are being persecuted for their political conduct rather than their criminal behavior. So basically, he's trying to tell us that everyone who's been indicted and prosecuted for January 6th did not engage in criminal conduct. That's the logic of what he's saying, and we've just come so low in this house. It's just frightening to me what people will do to try and minimize the work of those individuals who came to this Capitol on January 6th. This entire Republican conspiracy theory was launched based on the testimony of a so-called whistleblower, George Hill. He appeared for a transcribed interview last year. Mr. Hill claimed that the FBI was using the Bank of America to survey Americans. All Americans? Not all Americans. Everyone who owns a firearm, as the chairman said? not everyone who owns a firearm. The picking and choosing of language within an entire report is just inappropriate information given to the American people. Give them all of it so that they can see the true picture. Tell half a story, you're not telling the truth. The FBI asked the Bank of America for information on individuals who fit 3 categories. People who came, that there is evidence that they were here on January 6th, that they purchased a firearm in the last 6 months, and, that's key, and, not or, and they plan to come back for the inauguration. And they know that they were coming back for the inauguration based on Airbnb purchases, hotel, RSVPs in the DMV area. And they were individuals who had come on January 6th and know that through those purchases as well. And these were not all of the people that they were looking at, but what was the purpose of this? It was to make sure that a January 6th event didn't happen on inauguration because people were talking about it. They talk, you had up there DMVs. Do we know what DMVs are? I'm going to tell you that. It's domestic terrorists, individuals engaged in domestic violence. That happens. When it's people who fit your political agenda, they're not criminals anymore, they're patriots, they're victims, they're not, they're criminals. And a jury of their peers found that when so many of them have been prosecuted in our court of law. Not by brown shirts, not by Nancy Pelosi, not by Biden's Justice Department, by a jury of their peers. And it's surprising that we don't have George Hill here today, because in the same way that their star witness on their impeachment, Alexander Smirnov, remember him, who was their key witness in the Hunter Biden impeachment probe, until we found out that everything he said was made up and he actually got his information from Russia. We don't know what's going to happen with George Hill, but we can pretty well guess based on the track record. I want to thank our witnesses for being here. We don't always agree on things that witnesses say, but we thank them for their willingness to come and give their thoughts and be questioned by members of Congress here and of this hearing. I particularly want to thank Mr. Fanon for being here with us today. I want to thank him publicly for his bravery and his willingness in sharing his traumatic, harrowing experience so publicly so that we can understand and so that there can be truth juxtaposed to falsehoods. I'm sorry for you and all the men and women who fought on the front lines, just steps away from this room that we are in today, to protect all of us in this building, from staff, from the architects of the Capitol, to members of Congress, to the young people who were here. My experience here today is nothing compared to what those officers went through. And Mr. Fanon, while those of us on the dais were being protected in insecure locations, some of us fearing for our lives, many of us on both sides of the aisle fearing for their life on that day that they've quickly forgotten about after visits to Mar-a-Lago, I want to thank you because you saw it all, because you were out there. You didn't hide, you ran towards danger. You went out to meet the mob. You and your brothers and sisters in blue went out and did that. And I wanted to share just a reminder of what really occurred on that day.
You guys fight the right people. Push! I got you, Mike. That's my hand. You're good. Push him back! We need a medic! We need EMTs now!
Mike, stay in there, buddy. Mike, it's Jimmy. I'm here. Mike.
That's a battle scene. That's what that is. That's a battle scene. That is not political discord. That's criminal behavior. That's what that is. And while Capitol Police officers were slipping in blood on the ground as they fought their fellow officers' fight in that insurrection, those of us who were in the Capitol, those members of Congress and staff, were seeking shelter. And unfortunately, Mr. Fanon, you have met the times that we are in. You have given up your safety to secure truth. Unfortunately, many of my colleagues on the other side know the truth, but they're still seeking shelter from Donald Trump's hordes. They're still seeking shelter from the truth. They want to protect not just themselves, but their political careers, their jobs. They're hiding behind lies for that. We know what happened, not just by those videos and footage, but the nearly 1,000 convictions obtained against those rioters across an array of jurisdictions. Conviction from career prosecutors, not political hacks, with juries of the defendant's peers, everyday Americans who saw the evidence. Evidence that has been obtained by prosecutors and investigators have worked to hold these violent individuals accountable for their horrendous deeds. So, I got a lot of else that I could have talked about, but I guess we'll get to it.
Gentlelady yields back. Without objection, all of their opening statements will be included. All those in...
Move to strike the last word.
Oh, gentleman from California is recognized.
I guess it's a good thing that some folks on the other side are now interested in what happens in a locker room, and we're not going to look the other way. Okay? I'll accept that. But this is something that is not a thing. It's not a thing. We have things happening in our community that are a thing. Kids getting mowed down by assault rifles at their school, that's a thing. Young women in their community having IVF treatments banned, that's a thing. Women.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for their willingness to testify before the committee. As evidenced by today's hearing, the singular mission of this so-called subcommittee on weaponization and the House Republican leadership appears to be the proliferation or, ironically, the weaponization of false narratives for political purposes. Combined with the rudderless efforts to develop evidence for the impeachment of President Biden, these proceedings have become increasingly bizarre at every turn. You know, once upon a time, we were told that the key to all of this was the Hunter Biden laptop. That was the smoking gun that would solve all of this. Until then, it wasn't. Then it was getting Hunter Biden to testify. That was going to be the conclusive evidence. Until, at one point, he had the courage to walk into a hearing, sit in the front row, and then all of a sudden, Republicans rejected his offer to testify publicly and instead voted to hold him in contempt. Then it was going to be the testimony of the Republicans' top legal expert witnesses who were going to appear before Congress and offer evidence against President Biden and lay out the legal theory to justify articles of impeachment. But they showed up, all of them with great resumes, but with no evidence. And they testified under oath, that they could not find any evidence that would support or suggest such charges. And finally, last month, the Trump-appointed special counsel David Weiss announced that he had indicted Chairman Jim Jordan's star witness, former FBI informant Alexander Smirnov, for making false statements and fabricating evidence to federal investigators about President Biden and his family, including the shameless lie that President Biden sought millions in bribes from Ukrainian energy company Burisma when he served as vice president. Now, Smirnov, some of you may not remember, but Smirnov is the guy that Chairman Jordan described, and I'll give you a quote, the chairman's quote, as providing, quote, the most corroborating evidence the Republicans have, close quote, in support of impeachment. So given that Smirnov is being charged by the Republican Trump-appointed special counsel for lying and fabricating evidence, and the pathetic show that the Republicans have put on so far, that assessment is probably correct. He's probably the best they've got. Now the chairman of this subcommittee is determined to obscure the facts surrounding January 6th. Today's hearing appears to be based on the false narrative that conservative Americans and even Bible purchasers are the targets of pervasive and baseless financial surveillance by the federal government. It also follows statements made by several House members downplaying the attacks that Officer Fanon has described at the U.S. Capitol complex as, quote, acts of vandalism, close quote, and a normal tourist visit. That could not be further from the truth. As reported by the Bipartisan Select Committee on January 6th in its final report, our nation endured an insurrection that specifically sought to violently block congressional certification of the 2020 presidential election. The sheer scale of the mob violence that you saw on the video earlier and the lawlessness that was exhibited that day tested the very fabric of our democracy, with rioters savagely beating law enforcement officers like Officer Fanon amid repeated crowd chants such as hang Mike Pence, shoot him with his own gun. The Republican vice president, hang Mike Pence. That's what makes you an extremist. That's what makes you a terrorist. Not just your desire to purchase under the Second Amendment a weapon that you're legally entitled to have. It also warranted additional investigatory efforts by federal law enforcement authorities to prevent more violence leading up to the 2021 presidential inauguration. Officer Fanon, as a former Metropolitan Police officer, could you please tell us how the promulgation of false narratives, like this was just a tourist visit or simple vandalism, how that distorted description affects your ability to do your job?
Thank you for the question. Well, essentially, the distortions, mischaracterizations, and lies about January 6th resulted in, or at least partially played a role in me leaving my job as a Metropolitan Police officer. They have inspired fellow Americans to threaten me, threaten members of my family, simply because of the statements that I've made about my experience, both on January 6, 2021, and in the aftermath.
Well, thank you very much. My time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous
Mr.
consent request.
I would thank you for your service.
Gentleman yields back.
Unanimous consent request.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding. I was just going to point out that Jared Kushner was one of the key officials involved in the Abraham Accords. If we want to talk about influencing foreign, how about the President of the United States, what he said in his State of the Union regarding Israel, and how about what the Democrat leader of the Senate said last week, in that Israel should change its prime minister, for goodness sake. That to me is a concern. Jared Kushner was doing good work with the Abraham Accords. Of course, the Democrats don't want to admit that. I appreciate the gentleman for yielding.
Chair now recognizes.
Mr. Chairman, I have a motion. I would move pursuant to Clause 2K6 of Rule 11 that the committee issue a subpoena to Jared Kushner to compel testimony related to the $2 billion collected from Saudi Arabia after his service within the White House.
Second.
There's a motion, and for what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Move to table the motion.
There's a motion the motion to table is not debatable. As many as are in favor of tabling signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion to table is agreed to. The committee will now resume consideration of this hearing. Now, chair recognizes, is it Ms. Lee?
And to be clear, that the witness did appear to testify on the date that my colleague stated he did not come to testify. He was here, and the White House and this committee staff did not work out the terms of that interview. So I don't want it to appear that he has shirked his willingness to be a part of any hearing or any testimony or any interview by this.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are seeing a pattern here now, a year and a half into this Congress, and we see it with the impeachment investigation, and we are seeing it starkly here. Let's make a lot of really bold allegations and then try to weave in and mislead some evidence to justify them. It certainly happened in the impeachment, and it is happening here again, because in order to, quote, coerce or censor, then that means, A, whoever the private company that receives the communication from the government must feel coerced and act on that information, and B, they would not have done that but for the government intervention. And the problem that we continue to have with my Republican colleagues is they can get the first thing, but they never get the second. That is why evidence is important, and that's why we rely on evidence. So when colleagues over on the other side of the aisle talk about a TikTok ban, they are misrepresenting what the bill did. The bill required ByteDance to divest from TikTok, not to ban TikTok, and that is so consistent with all of the cherry picking of these emails that we have seen here today. I want to bring up another example, which was actually the focus of an entire hearing on this topic, but has not been mentioned once today. And that is the email from Clark Humphrey to Twitter related to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s tweet about blaming Hank Aaron's death on the COVID vaccine. And this was the center of the Republican case up until today, and now we're moving on. And I want to just stress why. Clark Humphrey wrote, wanted to flag the below tweet, and I'm wondering if we can get moving on the process for having it removed ASAP. Oh my goodness, coercion. That is censorship. It's some industrial complex. But you know what the problem was? It wasn't taken down. It wasn't taken down. Twitter received that email from the White House and did not act on it. Mr. Seligman, is there possible to have coercion when someone does not do what the other person asks?
No.
Now, we've heard a lot on the other side of the aisle. I think my friend Mr. Stubbe talked so much about March 2nd, all the emails to Amazon and trying to ban books. Well, we were not allowed to enter into the record some of the testimony from the employee who received those emails at Amazon, but I'm going to go through this transcript because this employee was asked about that email. Even though you anticipated that you might be asked to remove content when you had a live conversation with Mr. Flaherty, you in fact were not asked to remove any content. Question? Answer, that's my recollection, yes. So I just want to be clear, to your knowledge, did anyone from the US government, including Mr. Flaherty or Mr. Slavitt, both of whom are witnesses here, ever coerce Amazon into removing content from its platforms? No. The answer, as the ranking member pointed out with so many other companies, was that they made their independent decisions what to do with the content based on information provided from public health experts like Mr. Slavitt and the CDC, and how that applies to their own policies. So you cannot have a First Amendment violation when a private company is making its own independent decisions, as every single company as part of this investigation did. So what is this all about? It's not actually about proving a First Amendment violation. What the Republicans want to do with this committee, because we've had hearing after hearing after hearing about some bogus First Amendment violation by private companies, is they want to chill the government from actually interacting with the private companies as we come upon an election in November of 2024. Russia interfered through social media in 2016. Russia tried to interfere in 2020, and you can bet Russia is trying to interfere in our election in 2024, and the only way that these social media companies can know that is by being provided with information from the United States government and their law enforcement investigations. And if that can't happen, then Donald Trump and these Republicans benefit because Russia will help them. That is why we're here, and that is why this is bogus. And I yield back.
Time of the gentleman expired. Gentleman from North Dakota is recognized. I appreciate the gentleman yielding. Chill the government? Oh my God, that's almost as crazy as what Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson said in the arguments in front of the Supreme Court when she said to the Solicitor General from Louisiana, "Counselor, your position has the First Amendment hamstringing the government." This is not about. This is not about. I know the gentleman from New York is sharper than that. I know that Professor Zawicki, Mr. Goldman,
Mr. Chair. You can only, someone has, as a point of order, time can only be yielded to you if the individual remains here during the person.
Yeah, you got to cite a rule, but we can also get Mr. Armstrong back if you're.
Then you should do that.
You're going to do that. Okay. But you need to cite the rule. If not, we'll proceed. When he comes back, we'll make sure he gets back.
Mr. Chairman, will you just yield quickly for a brief response?
It's my 5 minutes. No, it's my 5 minutes, and when I'm done with 5 minutes.
Okay, so you're going to attack me and not let me respond?
No, I said, I know you're smarter.
You said my name.
I was complimenting the new.
You said my name, you said I know you're smarter than that, because I did not say anything about the First Amendment being used to chill the government. I said you in this committee are trying to chill government agencies. That's very different.
We're trying to protect the First Amendment. We're trying to protect the government from chilling American speech. Let the record show the gentleman from North Dakota has returned to his spot on the committee. Professor Zawicki, let's reference the email that Mr. Goldman brought up. And he said that the RFK Jr. tweet wasn't taken down. But I think this whole chilling effect is proven by this email, because there were 2 sentences. The first sentence said, "Wanted to flag the below tweet, and I'm wondering if we can get moving on the process for having it removed ASAP." So these guys, actually Ms. Humphrey, who works with them, said to Twitter, "Take this thing down. We don't like what RFK Jr., our political opponent, subsequent political opponents saying, take it down," right? And Mr. Goldman says, "Oh, no problem, they didn't take it down." But there's still a concern about chilling speech, right?
Exactly right, Mr. Chairman. And that's exactly what the problem here is there's this obsession with protecting the government's free speech rights. But we need to be worried about protecting people's rights. We need to be worried about protecting my rights. We need to be worried about people's rights to speak and to hear information that is relevant to their lives. And so if we're concerned about chilling speech, we should be concerned about chilling the speech of private citizens through the government overreach.
Now, I want to ask you about this. The next sentence. So, take down this tweet ASAP. Mr. Goldman says, "Oh, they didn't take it down, so there's no problem." But the next sentence says, "And then, if you can keep an eye out for tweets that fall in this same genre, that would be great." That's the real chilling impact. "Oh, we caught you. We don't like this tweet. We don't like what it conveys. Take it down." They don't take it down. But now, in the back of their mind, they're saying, "Oh, you know what? I better be on the lookout for anything else, or I'm going to get another call, another email. Mr. Flaherty's going to call me. Mr. Slavitt's going to call me and say, what the heck are you doing?" He's going to be outraged. He's going to pressure us, which all happened. So the second sentence is the chilling effect in that email. Is that right?
Yes.
This This is just ridiculous. Oh, and let's go to the Amazon communications. Because this was speech that was changed. This was content that was changed at the request of the guys in the Biden administration. The impetus for this request is criticism from the Biden administration about sensitive books we were given prominent placement to. So we're going to create a new do not promote class for anti-vax books. So they demoted these books. So a direct result of they said it themselves. The impetus, the catalyst for this is the guys at the White House. That's us not just chilling, that's actual action taking place at the request of government to limit speech and who gets to see it.
And I would add, this isn't the government providing public information about issues of health. This is the government engaged in an ongoing secretive process that we've only discovered through discovery in that case and through the hard work of this committee subpoenaing these private actors, a secretive scheme to target named individuals for suppression for speech. And we don't even know if it's going on.
Yeah.
That is a big difference between the government expressing its opinion and targeting people secretly to remove their speech from the public forum.
Take down this tweet ASAP, the White House. And be on the lookout for any other thing in this genre.
Exactly.
That's a direct attack. That's as big a chilling impact as you can have on speech, coming from the office of the president, the White House itself. I appreciate the gentleman yield back to Maynard.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Gentle lady is recognized for
I just want to clarify that it is Rule 9F that requires a member to be actually present in order to possess a 5-minute period of questioning.
Yeah,
So
I
in the
appreciate it.
future, if we can ensure that when members yield that they remain in the room, that would be helpful.
Great.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentle lady from.
They insisted, as was their right under the law, that the DA put me before the grand jury.
Right.
So that I was scheduled for a Monday. On the Friday before, I gave the DA's office the courtesy of a Zoom conference for about an hour and a half. 8 assistant district attorneys and me on the other end. I explained, they didn't really ask me any questions. They just said, what do you want to say? Nice warm greeting for somebody who's trying to show them the right path quietly and privately so that they could correct their error before they made it. Here's what happened.
We'll stop there, Mr. Costa. We'll get back to you during the questions, okay?
Did I run out of my time already?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, a little bit. That's
So
fine.
I had 8 minutes. This says I have 138 to go, or is I'm 138 over?
138 over.
I'm sorry.
That's fine. That's fine.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, point of order.
Yeah.
Will the witnesses all be given 7, 8 minutes? What is that?
Yeah.
It's usually 5, so we didn't know that in advance to be able to
We're going to give him a little extra time. I gave you 14.
But she didn't have time to prepare 8 minutes of testimony, opening statement.
She's a smart lawyer. She can probably ad lib for a few minutes if she'd like, but that's totally up to her.
We'd like it to be something more than ad lib, as we just heard.
We listened to you talk for 14 minutes and 14
That's called an opening
seconds.
statement. I'm allowed to talk as long as I want.
And I was fine. I let you go 14 minutes and 14 seconds.
You have to let me go for 14 minutes if that's what I want to do.
Exactly.
But
Exactly right. Mr.
you could
Trustee,
let
you
us
are
have-
recognized for your opening
The
statement.
courtesy of advance notice would have been helpful.
For an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we last conducted an oversight hearing of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or ATF, just over 1 year ago. Since that time, a few things have changed and a great many things have stayed the same. Let's begin with what has changed. Last month, the Attorney General signed an ATF final rule clarifying who is, quote, engaged in the business, unquote, of selling firearms, and who must therefore obtain a license to sell firearms and conduct the necessary background checks. This rule implements a change in this definition made by Congress when we passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first significant piece of gun violence prevention legislation in nearly 30 years. Prior to the passage of the BSCA, a person was, quote, engaged in the business, unquote, of selling firearms if they did so, quote, with the principal objective of livelihood and profit, close quote. But under the new law, a person is engaged in the business of selling firearms if they do so, quote, to predominantly earn a profit, unquote. In finalizing this new rule, ATF has adhered to its directive from Congress and has ensured that ATF regulations are consistent with the definitions we updated through this historic legislation that makes Americans safer. Importantly, the new definition and the new rule ensure that more gun sales, including those at gun shows or through the internet, include a background check, a life-saving tool that keeps guns out of dangerous hands. These changes are the only significant expansion of the federal background check system since it was established in the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act in 1993. The Department of Justice estimates that there are over 20,000 unlicensed sellers who are taking advantage of ambiguity in the law and who will now have to obtain a license and conduct background checks. Yesterday, in a related hearing, Republicans argued that this new rule is being used to target individuals who are merely selling a gun from their personal collection or who occasionally buy and sell guns as part of a hobby. This is false. The rule, quote, expressly recognizes that individuals who purchase firearms for the enhancement of a personal collection or a legitimate hobby are permitted by the Gun Control Act to occasionally buy and sell firearms for those purposes or occasionally resell to a licensee or to a family member for lawful purposes without the need to obtain a license, close quote. The final rule also states that, quote, nothing in this rule shall be construed as precluding a person from lawfully acquiring a firearm for self-protection or other lawful personal use, close quote. The law and the rule do not impose any new requirements on those who are merely selling a firearm to a neighbor, a friend, or family member, or those who collect and occasionally sell firearms as part of their hobby. Rather than targeting innocent lobbyist sellers, this rule will prevent illegal gun sellers from profiting off gun trafficking. This comes at a critical time, given that the ATF's National Firearms Commerce and Trafficking Assessment revealed that unlicensed gun sales were contributing more and more to the flow of firearms into the black market and, unsurprisingly, becoming a leading source of crime guns. The second new development since we last heard from ATF Director Dettelbach is that Republicans used their control of the House to enact significant cuts to several critical law enforcement agencies, including the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the ATF. We knew this was coming because Republicans have been forthright in their determination to defund, intimidate, and hamstring the agency so that it can no longer effectively do its job and protect Americans from violent crime. Republicans' own messaging documents actually celebrate the 7% cut to the ATF, the law enforcement agency responsible for protecting communities from gun violence, stopping gun trafficking, and ensuring lawful and responsible gun ownership. This brings me to what is still as true today as it was over a year ago when we last conducted an oversight hearing of the ATF. ATF is still the primary federal agency tasked with keeping guns out of the wrong hands, and it is still doing that important work even with the budget cuts forced through by House Republicans. ATF is still providing vital resources that help state and local law enforcement solve crimes and prevent gun violence. ATF is still the only agency in the country that is able to trace crime guns, helping law enforcement determine how a gun came to be owned and used in a violent crime. ATF is also still the only agency that provides local, state, tribal, and federal law enforcement with ballistic imaging analysis, a critical tool that can help solve crime and prevent further gun violence. It provides its assistance at no cost to its law enforcement partners. Despite the significant value that ATF provides to state and local law enforcement, Republicans have defunded the agency, and they repeatedly seek to unravel its regulations through litigation, Congressional Review Act resolutions, and frivolous investigations, even when ATF is merely following the law as directed by Congress. Some Republicans have even introduced a bill to abolish the ATF altogether. The majority says that it stands with law enforcement. So why does it seek to abolish the only law enforcement agency with the capability of tracing crime guns? The majority says that they support state and local police. So why do they attempt to starve the agency that provides state and local police officers with so many critical resources for solving crime, including homicides, gun trafficking, and organized crime? And why do they oppose common sense protections like background checks and red flag laws favored by state and local police agencies nationwide? The answer lies in another part of ATF's responsibilities, making sure that gun dealers follow the law by conducting background checks, refusing to sell to those who are not allowed to have firearms, and keeping records so that crime guns can be traced. The overwhelming majority of gun sellers have no problem following these laws, but when gun dealers willfully refuse to follow them, it is ATF's responsibility to revoke their license to sell. Republicans' priorities are clear. They would prefer to keep every gun store in the country open, even those that willfully violate the law, rather than to let ATF save lives simply by enforcing the law. And this brings me to the final thing that is still the same since our last oversight hearing. It is still the case that we're losing more than 100 Americans to gun violence every single day. Even without counting suicides, we have already lost more than 6,000 Americans to shootings so far this year. That includes 88 young children, 454 teens, and 30 law enforcement officers who were killed by gunfire just this year. Democrats have put forth a range of solutions to prevent gun violence, to support law enforcement, and to solve crimes. But since they took control of the House, our Republican colleagues have not advanced a single bill that would make Americans safer from gun violence. Instead, they have continued to push for unfettered access to assault weapons, concealable rifles, and ghost guns, and to abolish the very agency tasked with preventing gun crimes. As Republicans continue to seek freedom from gun regulations, we will continue to see communities free from gun violence. Director Dettelbach, thank you for appearing here today to talk about the important work that the ATF does to keep Americans safe. I look forward to your testimony, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back $1.4 billion in 2022, $1.6 billion in 2023, $1.75 billion in 2024. Hardly a cut to their budget. Gentleman from California withdraws a point of order who seeks recognition. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, much as I don't like certain parts of the Mazars decision, it clearly applies in this case, and the committee is required to engage with the White House in order to seek an accommodation over materials held by a private party, as they were in the Mazars case, and seek to resolve this with the White House. So I would ask unanimous consent that we enter into the record your correspondence to the White House.
Objection.
Seeking to engage them to resolve this. And I thank the chairman for not objecting. Can you produce that correspondence to the White House asking for accommodation on these materials you've sought by this subpoena?
First time they reached out to us was 2 days ago.
Yes, and of course the author expressed the concern that these materials may implicate interests of the executive. I think that was weeks ago. But having admitted without dissent your correspondence to the White House, can you produce that for us where you have sought an accommodation, where you've sought to work this out with the White House? Can you share that with us since that is now part of the record?
Well, I thought you had it. You wanted to be entered into the record.
I do. I presume that, knowing your responsibilities, you have sought to engage the White House. So,
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Produce the
recognized for point of order.
I think a unanimous consent request to submit something to the record is where the person who's asking for the floor is the proponent of